Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, we will have two important guests with us. We're going to be going away a little bit from the war and the Middle East, a little bit, not too much. In the first hour, we're going to have Tom Sunic. He's a professor who taught in some American universities here, but he lately wrote a book. We'll introduce him in details in a little bit, but his book is called the Homo Americanus, and what is so important about this particular book that it talks about America. Yesterday America and today America. What took place from America has changed. It has changed with this multiculturalism, which in a way it might have an advantage, but in other ways it might have a disadvantage on the future and the present of the United States. So we will talk to Tom and find out exactly what is his book is all about. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking with a super soldier. That is someone who is, well, this gentleman, Duncan, he works for the CIA. This man has superior powers, and I'm not kidding, paranormal powers, that he very much can move things just with his mind. And he, as a matter of fact, he had an implant in his head where he feels that he was probably being controlled by that little particular implant in his mind. So we'll talk to him and find out what the CIA is after. Before we go to our guests, let's just comment a little bit on what is happening in the Middle East. And I might just say thank you, George Bush, for doing what you have done in the Middle East, because now the whole area is very much in flame. Right now we see bombs going over in Turkey. We see bombs, we see explosives going on in Lebanon. The Palestinian-Israeli issue is being inflamed all over again. So, and of course Iraq, we're still in that particular problem there with Iraq. So, thank you, Bush, for doing what you have done. You know, we exported liberty and democracy to the Middle East. Now the whole area. Now, how many things does this guy wants to screw up? I mean, he screwed up practically every company that was given to him. He did not have to work for him. He did not have to work for a penny in his life. He screwed up every company. He screwed up Texas. He screwed up the United States. And now he's screwing up the world. You know, if he screwed up the United States, well, guess what? Somehow he ended up on the top of the pyramid there in the United States, and that's the United States problem. People in the world will look at us and say, that's your problem. But now he is the world's problem. Because everything that is happening there in the Middle East, ladies and gentlemen, is of his own doing. Now, this last stuff that's going on in Lebanon, where the Lebanese army have shelled a Palestinian refugee camp because of this new group that have nothing to do with Palestinians or Palestine, a group that was created very much like the groups that were created in Iraq by the CIA and the cronies that we have in the Middle East. Now we see this particular group, you probably heard of them or you did not hear of them, the group that is called Fatah al-Islam, which has nothing to do with Fatah. Fatah is one of the largest Palestinian factions that have nothing to do with this. And Islam have nothing to do with this particular group. This is a new group that started back in December that has nothing to do. As a matter of fact, if you remember when last summer when Israel attacked Lebanon and Hezbollah was there to defend Lebanon, the United States did not like the fact that Hezbollah practically defeated Israel. And I've told everyone before that Hezbollah will be the major player in Lebanon. See, the United States wanted to install a government in Lebanon, very much like the government we installed in Iraq, very much like the governments we have around in that area, like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, which is very much governments that we can say, do it, and they will do it. So we wanted to put a government in Lebanon. Well, guess what? Israel did not defeat Hezbollah. If Israel defeated Hezbollah, it would have been a different story. But Israel did not defeat Hezbollah, and therefore the United States cannot dictate what government, on what shape of government should go in Lebanon. But they're trying very hard. They could not do it by Israel. So they created this particular group, and this particular group was held by the same government that is trying now to kill it. The only purpose for that group is to say, now Lebanon have terrorists. This particular group was held by Hariri. It was held by Senora, the head of the government there in Lebanon. And they're the same people who said, go after them. So after they created this group out of nothing, now they want to finish them off just so they can say that we have terrorists in Lebanon, which will give the West, the United States included, and the Europeans an excuse to go in and control Lebanon and install other governments that they want in there. And at the same time, they chose this name, Fatah al-Islam, for two things. Number one, Fatah is a Palestinian name. It's the name of the largest Palestinian faction. Number two, they put al-Islam there so it can be with the same type of Al-Qaeda ideology, so they can sell it in the West, as this is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. And since the Palestinians are there in these refugee camps that they have been in there for 60 years, so this is a time to disarm those Palestinians with whatever small arms they have in these camps. So Israel will have control of all the Palestinians inside Palestine and even outside Palestine in refugee camps in Lebanon. That's what it boils down to. But in the meantime, somebody screwed up there in Lebanon and told the army to go ahead and shell that Palestinian camp. And that somebody will have to pay dearly politically, because that was the worst thing they have done in their lives. I'm saying this because it is horrible. If you want these people that you created yourself, and there are about 200 or 300 of them, you should find a different way to go and get them. Yes, there was a battle a couple of days ago between the Lebanese army, where the Lebanese army have lost 27 people. It is sad. It should not have taken place. And 17 of these Fatah al-Islam guys. The surprise was that those 17 who died in that battle from that little group, 10 of them were Lebanese, 4 of them were Syrians, and 3 of them were Saudis. None of them were Palestinians. But yet, they went and shelled a Palestinian camp that supposedly these 200 or 300 of this particular faction are inside these camps. So you go and shell the whole camp. Anyhow, just wanted to shed some light on that, because a lot of people, this thing is still fresh. A lot of people don't know what's going on. This is not a Palestinian Lebanese problem. This has nothing to do with Palestinians. It is purely what happened is a lot larger than Palestinians. It's a lot larger than Lebanese. This is what the CIA, this is what the United States, this is what Israel have concocted with some elements within the Lebanese society, and that's what we have now. It should not. They are trying to throw a wedge between the Lebanese and the Palestinians, just like they already threw a wedge between the Lebanese themselves, between Shiites and Sunnis, between the Christians themselves too in Lebanon. They are split. So, tell you what, we don't want to waste more time on this, but I think it's very obvious of what is going on. Now, we're going to turn to our guest. Our guest is Dr. Tomislav Sunic. He's an author, a translator, and a short story writer. He has published articles in Croatian and English dealing with cultural pessimism and historical meaning of conservatism. He obtained his BA degree in literature and foreign language at the University of Zagreb in Croatia and completed his PhD in political science at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He also worked as a diplomat at Croatia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His book, ladies and gentlemen, it's an extremely important book. Now, he also, Dr. Sunic, he also taught. He was a professor of political science at Juanita College in Huntington. And his book, ladies and gentlemen, is extremely important. In his book, he describes the origins and dynamics of America's founding myths, quoting and translating from many long-forgotten and suppressed sources from the fields of literature, history, and anthropology, and philosophy. And the book represents I want to, for the sake of time, I will have him talk more about the book. But after the fall of communism, the United States still was perceived by many East Europeans as the incarnation of good, a symbol of enormous wealth and a place of boundless economic opportunity. To some extent, East European attitudes towards America resembles those of West Europeans following World War II in their eyes. America was a myth that surpassed the often gloomy American reality. Many East Europeans are now going through similar psychological convulsions and self-induced misperception. The first cracks in their imaginary image of America are beginning to appear. Without any further ado, let's go to Dr. Sunic. So I'm really sorry, and I have to apologize, because while you were talking, we very much had to work through, even though, because the problem just happened when you came on. I mean, we did the testing was okay, it's just now. So I'm going to have, bear with me, I'm going to have to start all over again, so our viewers, they were having problem hearing you. I was hearing you fine, but the viewers could not hear you. So let's just go ahead and start from the scratch of what you were saying. Now, your book, sir, is about the United States. Tell me, I know you're going to repeat things that you repeated, but the viewers did not hear you. So tell me, what is your book about, and why did you want to write a book about the United States?
All right. The main reason behind writing this book was the following. After the end of communism in the East, specifically after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, I thought it might be appropriate to write a book about Americanism. Why was that? Because back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, as you may all recall, especially some of your older viewers and listeners, we were constantly bombarded by this negative stereotyping of communism. And we always thought, well, what the hell the Soviet Union is, and we have to fight against communism. Lots of governmental money was pumped into different projects and think tanks in Washington and California dealing with the psychology of communism. Words point, even the Minister of Foreign Affairs in America, Condoleezza Rice, she was actually doing her PhD in Soviet studies. So, in fact, there was a study in the Sovietology and Kremlinology. So, literally, America spent billions and billions of dollars in studying the psychology, or we can say the pathology of communism. So I thought after a while it might be just as well appropriate, especially after the end of the Cold War, especially after America becoming the sole superpower, so to speak, not just a global but a planetary power nowadays, I'm talking about nowadays, why don't we just lean, and why don't we look at the American psychology now? Why don't we look at the American foreign policy, but not just in the institutional and old-fashioned way, but also from different perspectives, including biology, sociobiology, anthropology, literature. I always had something behind my mind hovering. I thought, what type of a selection or sociobiological selection occurred in the United States of America as to have created this man that I call Homo Americanus, or American man in Latin. So this was the same thesis that we once employed in studying the Soviet Union and communism. Of course, there was such a natural, it was a sociobiological negative selection that occurred in communism as a result of mass genocides, which you very seldom hear of, not just in ex-communist Yugoslavia, but also in the Soviet Union. There were millions and millions of people who were slaughtered in communist purges or who died. So I thought, again, well, some sort of a new man must have emerged. This Homo Sovieticus, this communized man must have emerged in the East. And as a mirror image of that, I also wanted to examine this new American man. So this is what my main thesis, or rather main approach is. As far as the thesis is concerned, in this first chapter that I'm dealing with, Homo Americanus, Homo Sovieticus, real briefly, I'm studying those amazing parallels between Americanism and communism. Again, between Sovietism, if you wish. But I'm just trying to
are you seeing any similarities between communism and Americanism?
Of course I see many, but let me just make one thing certain. I want to avoid the words communism, because in America you will seldom hear the word communism, and this is where many conservatives, especially paleo-conservatives, make mistakes, where they use communism even in a derogatory sense. But yes, indeed, you can say, and that's what I'm arguing in my book. By the way, so I'm heavily backing it up with translated with the citations from different languages and some prominent French, German, Italian authors. And I'm trying to sound serious in this book, and I certainly urge your readers to look first at the bibliography before they start reading the book. Now, take for instance the fact that both America and the Soviet Union, both communism and Americanism, if I can put it that way, are based on the principles of perpetual progress. Americans nowadays believe, just like I once did when my communized youth, ex-communist Yugoslavia, in this perpetual progress where the future has to unfold and end up in this beautiful and glorious static present. Well, of course, you know now in America what's going on. Secondly, look at the concept of multiculturalism, which this was exactly the same concept, but different name, keep in mind, in ex-communist Yugoslavia and ex-communist Soviet Union. Look where it ended up, forced multiculturalism. It ended up in the bloody unnecessary civil war. It ended unnecessarily in the Soviet Union, unnecessarily, I'm making a stupid value judgment, in the disruption of the whole state. But basically, this is also one of the principles of the feminist action.
Tom, are you on a cell phone?
Yes, no, I'm on the ground line.
On a ground line.
Oh, no?
Okay.
Yes.
No, go ahead.
You hear me? Should I speak a little bit? Yes, and then look at some of the practices now, especially in the public forum and also in academia, which I'm very well aware of because I was a professor back in the States. Look at this concept of political correctness. Look at this gender studies. Look at the Holocaust studies. These are some of the issues we actually had. It was a mandatory issue back in communist Yugoslavia, communist Soviet Union. And again, you just have to be careful with the lingo, with the language we use. Because words like, let's say, sensitivity training did not exist in the Soviet Union, or for that matter in communist Yugoslavia. We used different words, but the concepts were pretty much the same. The folks of my age, when I was a young kid, of course, were literally forced into accepting this mandatory utopian communist future, and eventually, look what it ended up. In fact, I do draw a parallel quite extensively between the Soviet mind and the communist mind, and I basically am arguing in the first chapter mind that communism disappeared, broke down, such as we knew it under this name of communism in the East. Why? Because it was successfully implemented. The to Western Europe and particularly in the United States of America, to open border policy, to multiculturalism, to all those gender studies which are now being closed to universities. And of course, through, and I'd like to lean again on that a little bit, through the self-censorship and thought police in universities and to some extent also in the public arena and political arena.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about multiculturalism. Do you see that as a positive aspect for the United States' future, or is it a negative?
Again, I'm sorry if I'm bothering with some concepts. We first need to clarify the word. This word multiculturalism is wrong. It's basically a euphemism, the embellisher. So why don't we use the word racialism? Because when we talk about multiculturalism, what we have, all of us, you and me, back of our minds, are different races. But for some reasons, talk about race, don't panic, because it's not a politically correct word. We talk about racism and racialism when, of course you are reading my mind, only when racial real riots occur, such as during Katrina or in Cincinnati a couple of years ago, in LA in 1992, which I also witnessed firsthand. So basically what I'm certainly arguing in my book, and not just arguing, also backing it up with heavy doses of the literature from sociologists, anthropologists, and all the rest. No, multiculturalism, let's call it multiculturalism, it's never functioned. Look at, for instance, ex-communist Yugoslavia, which also experienced firsthand when the war started here. Even the folks who were amazingly similar to each other, they went to war, a very brutal war, with very little distinction between the Muslims and the Serbian Christian Orthodox and the Catholic Cross. The only difference you can argue with was their religion, their religious affiliations. But in terms of their anthropology, I was very hesitant to talk about them with adjectives because they all look European. In fact, Muslim, you will find very large doses of very blonde and tall people. That's very surprising. And yet you see that multiculturalism doesn't function because when you do that by force, it forces people by some stupid governmental presence or stupid governmental decrees that they have to live in promiscuous. In reality, the end result is always the brutal war. It's just like a marriage. You don't function in the real life of a mate. For some reason, there's a difference. Why play games? Why don't you just start companies? This is actually what I'm arguing, but of course in the more scientific, in the more academic language. So by and large, well, look at Israel, for instance, look at Palestine. Don't get me wrong, I just want to put things in perspective. If folks don't get along fine, it's better to erect walls, just stashing them together and play for the rest of their lives, some stupid games of mimicry, of make-believe, love, and conviviality, as we did as kids back in communist Yugoslavia. We had to play games of multiculturalism with our Serbian and Muslim fellows, and then at the end of, and when we came back home, then we were cracking jokes, beating each other. I'm sorry to say that, but let's do decide what to think about it. Let's do decide this angelic world is more like the fact of the matter is, it's not a single country on earth, a single multicultural exists which functions well.
So tell me, East Germans, those who used to be in what was once called the Eastern Bloc, they used to think of the United States as being a paradise. Now, those feelings, once they very much learned what paradise looked like, they very much kind of don't like paradise anymore. Is that why did that change? Is it because they did not know what it was, or because it has changed since then?
Well, both. But I'm glad that you've raised this question. Indeed, I myself, during communism, you had, how can I put it? You had this opportunity of comparing, because in comparing, and you had that communism, you could always find good spots in capitalism, specifically the United States of America, which by and large during the Cold War was the most freest country on earth, with this bad negative object falling away and down forever communism. Then of course you start getting very, very picky about the country in which you live. And of course this country America then shows its own facts, which were very carefully hidden and taken over by anti-communists. I don't know if you can follow me that. Now, at this stage, America can no longer hide some of its primordial, if I can say, problems, facts that have existed for China, which it could, when projecting them on the Soviet back for war. So specifically now, the Europe of first back in 91, 92, countries were established here in the region. They're also becoming realized America is not just a Ashbury or Waxley, it's just shopping malls and you also have to pay a tax. You have to work hard, and on top of it, they realize that America doesn't have a social security system like paradoxically the communist system had. And now I talked to most of my fellow crops.
So are you saying the social security system under the communist or the socialist regimes is better than the social security system that we have in the United States?
Well, look at it's a qualified to better now. Of course, the medical service is America 10 times better than Washington, but much better than what they are actually in Europe. But the fact of the matter is, there was some Spartan and psychological security, which was taken for granted by most people in a communized Eastern Europe during the Cold War. However brutal, however vulgar, however repressive it was, but it was taken for granted. Now in this capitalism, which is, so to speak, spearheaded by Americanism, this no longer exists. Hence the psychological somersault that many post-communist citizens from Riga, if you wish, from the Baltic countries to the Balkan countries now go through. They would like to have it both. They would like to have communist predictability, and they would like to have the insurance and the medical insurance and all the rest. And yet, at the same time, they would like to live in this glitz and glamour that they have, that they see on the TV screen every day with opera show and with all those Mickey Mouse, stories. But you can't have it both, and that's what I'm saying. And I think that indeed, we mentioned earlier, the American system is now pretty much in decline.
Okay. Dr. Frederick Tobin of the Adelaide Institute, he, in his review of your book, he wrote, and I find it interesting, and maybe this is where we're headed, he said that the attack on this pillar of Western democracy is well underway by splitting free expression into a free speech and a hate speech. So it's no longer freedom of speech. Now they are basically splitting it of what kind of speech you're allowed to have. And he goes on, it says, once the latter, which is the hate speech, is established, then the usual words that make up the conceptual prison begin to grip, like hater, Holocaust denier, anti-Semite, racist, neo-Nazi, xenophobic, and the latest, which is terrorist. So very much now they can throw these labels on people. Do you see any of that happening in this free system that was once in America? Is this the start of regulating what people can and cannot speak? Do you see the future being controlled as it was in communist countries?
I'm glad that you have raised this issue, because this is exactly the main core of my book. And I'm talking about the soft totalitarianism in the United States, and not just in the United States, but also in the entire Western world, run by this Homo Americanus or Homo Occidentalis, we can say. Indeed, once upon a time, as I said earlier, it was very easy for us to project from the Western perspective all the evil on those bad guys in communism. But look what's going on now, not just in America is still good for the time being. But look what's going on in Western Europe. Even I myself have to be quite careful now with this quote-unquote liberalization and with this big democracy coming. These are also just good barriers for for covering up, serious violation of human rights. And for my personal matter, if I can say in a few words, I think it's gross and it's completely hypocritical to lecture and to moralize, let's say, to the Iranians, or for that matter to Lebanese or to Palestinians, to quote-unquote Shiites or Sunnis, about quote-unquote the violation of human rights, and to moralize the Muslims how they should behave with their women, when at the same time, look, there's some interesting, there's some serious people who are thrown into jail for just challenging this remaining discourse, the remaining narrative, which is either the Holocaust narrative or, for that matter, questioning the veracity of multiculturalism. So, by and large, there is a very, very serious intellectual repression going on to the media, which is very insidious because, unlike in communism, you cannot see who your enemy is. You cannot see who are any traces of blood. But it ruins people. It throws them out. They ruin their careers. I know lots of people in Germany who have finished PhD who can't find a job simply because they're not politically correct, because they're opposed to multiculturalism. In the United States as well. I don't want to mention their names. Folks also lost their jobs because they made statements which are quote-unquote not compatible with the gender studies, or for that matter, which were not quite compatible with the sexual life of some pressure groups.
So you see in this as you called it soft oppression, as in contrast with the hard oppression that was under the communist regimes. Now let's talk a little bit about how America changed, which is the immigrants. Before, mainly most people who were coming, they were white Europeans, and very much, and I think you touched on this in your book, that Europeans, when they came over to the United States, they were very much, I don't want to say forgot their motherland, but they very much were totally immersed in the United States, which was more of their culture, because the white culture in the United States was mainly Christian European. So it was not a lot of differences in cultures between those who immigrated to the United States from, let's say, Europe, especially Western Europe, and let's say now where most immigrants, legal and illegal, are coming from, which is the Latin countries. And most of those immigrants, their heart and soul, it's still in their homeland countries. That's the basic difference between the two waves of immigration that came over to the United States. Do you...
Well, let me, as I mentioned quite explicitly, I am against multiracialism. My way. I'm against multiracialism. I think that in the long run, mixing people together of different tribes, of different ethnic ethnic background, leads to disaster, unnecessary disaster. So let me just clear up.
So are you saying that we are headed towards disaster in the United States?
Well, I'm probably using a too strong word, but eventually, what had happened in Los Angeles, in New Orleans, in Cincinnati, I'm not quite optimistic about this brew, of this multiracial brew, of this clandestine immigration, which is changing the profile of the United States. Don't get me wrong, this is not a value judgment. I can give you an explicit example of ex-communist Yugoslavia. You can look at India in 46, 47, where there was the civil war. You can look at Pakistan. You can look at any country which has a multicultural character. It's very fragile in this sense. So this is not a value judgment. What I'm saying is that there were some major faux pas, there were major mistakes made by the American government in the mid-60s with the new immigration laws passed, which in fact brought many, many non-Europeans into the United States. And why I'm saying this? Because the sense of identity of the country was watered down. And this is the problem when the citizens lose the sense of identity, then of course then they lose the sense of social responsibility. This is exactly the major Xerox copy of what happened in ex-communist Yugoslavia when it fell apart, when people started scapegoating with each other and killing each other.
What you're saying is the American culture in itself is not strong enough or sophisticated enough to absorb the different cultures that are coming over here. And that's where the danger is, because what you're saying is this multiculturalism is the different cultures going to be the apparent cultures and not the supposedly American culture, which is, I mean, I don't really know what American culture right now, but what my understanding of American culture is the Christian, white, European sort of culture. And so what you're saying is that we will be headed towards what India and Yugoslavia went through, which is basically a division of that country physically.
Well, yes, that's what I'm arguing in my book, and I'm backing up my statements with some good quotes from some major anthropologists, from sociobiologists, and I'm also dwelling on this territorial imperative. I think it was Robert Arthur, a sociobiologist, wrote in the early 70s, like, people need to have their own turf. Well, look at the Palestinians. They just need to have their turf. Everybody wants to have his turf. Even when you are in your household, you need to have your own backyard. And however well you can get along with your neighbors, but you just want to stay on your ground. And that's why I'm saying in a social academic fashion in my book, eventually America might experience some very, very serious difficulties with this massive non-European immigration. Having said that, I'm not making a value judgment that Europeans are better, or for that matter that they're worse. In fact, I can be just as brutal with you and tell you that people who have hurt me personally, I'm not going to go into details, most were not blacks or Jews, or for that matter, Arabs, but those who have hurt me most are my fellow whites and Croatians. That's always the way of life. So we have to examine this topic much more carefully. But what I'm saying, yes, that the multicultural, multiracial system as the United States of America, Western Europe, now there's France. Look at France now.
Tom, we only have a few minutes left. So now we are about to accept about 12 or 14 million illegal immigrants who are already in the country. And those 14 million, they're probably now about 20 million once you get down to it. You're saying that the United States is really headed towards a period of time where it will not be able, my question is, why aren't the government of the United States doing anything about it, or why previous governments did not do much about this?
Well, primarily because, as I said earlier, because of this ideology of progress, the ideology of egalitarianism. The assumption is still being realized that we are all equal, that we are all tabula rasa. I myself, I think that we are also inheritors, that there are some significant intellectual differences between ourselves and also between races, and I think that we should look at this more and more carefully and more scientifically. And secondly, let's keep in mind also this rabite capitalism, this neoliberal capitalism. I don't blame the blacks, or for that matter the Mexicans who come over the border. I blame the capitalists, the American capitalists, who want to just exploit them for cheap money, for cheap labor. It's much cheaper for them to bring over some clandestine immigrants to work on their corn fields or rice fields than to have some whites, poor whites, pay them probably twice as much. So it's a very rapacious system. Actually, what I'm talking about, this Homo Americanus in Americanism, it's a critique also and a criticism against capitalism, this violent form of neoliberal globalist capitalism.
Is it too late for the United States to reverse this?
It's never late, but it has to set up its priorities. And secondly, I'm also addressing my book, and I'm so sorry we didn't have a chance to look at the secular version of Protestantism, of Calvinism, especially in foreign policy. It seems to me, again, that the Christian church also bears a great deal of responsibility with ecumenical speeches, that all people are equal, that in fact, look at this, the Catholic Church in New Mexico is also helping, and it's bringing the foreign immigrants into at least facilitating their integration. Well, integration is a bad word. They're not integrated at all. Their arrival to New Mexico. And I guess we have to look at this point from different perspectives. But the one thing we have to admit is that this is the first and foremost capitalism, the violent profit-making capitalism, which is bringing those people over here. At some point, even the capitalists, those richer tycoons, will realize that they have to pay the social service for those immigrants. And at some point, things will become very, very nasty, and I'm not ruling out the balkanization of the United States of America.
Wow, that's a strong word, the balkanization of the United States of America. Well, Tom, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I was glad we were able to take care of that audio problem, because the information you had given is very extremely valuable, and hopefully we'll have you back here soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Hesham.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will be back in 4 minutes, of course. And the next hour, we'll be speaking with Tom, not Tom, we'll be speaking with Duncan. Duncan used to be a CIA agent. He is a Superman, a super soldier, a man of many talents, and you will enjoy the next hour. It's something we never done before, but you will see what the CIA and how the CIA works. We will see you. Don't go too far. The next hour will be extremely exciting. See you then.